Hi, I'm William Milbury, a foreigner living in Japan, and this is my ongoing series of videos about the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear crisis in northeast Japan. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Japanese government safety limits that have been set and changed with regards to radioactive contamination in water, food, and other substances. And I'd like to invite you to think about what this implies about the Japanese government's goals and motives in dealing with this whole situation. Now, before this crisis began, I don't think many people in Japan had ever heard the term Becquerel, or Becquerel as it's pronounced by the Japanese. The Becquerel is a unit used to measure radioactive contamination in substances. It's named after Henry Becquerel, who shared a Nobel Prize along with Marie Curie for discoveries in radiation. And what a Becquerel is it's the number of atoms that radioactively decay and emit the radiation per second in a certain amount of a substance. So for instance, if we have water that's contaminated with 1 becquerel of radioactive iodine per liter, well, that means that there's enough radioactive iodine such that in 1 liter of water, each second 1 atom radioactively decays and releases its radiation. If we have water that's contaminated with 100 becquerels of iodine per liter, that means there's enough iodine such that each second in the 1 liter of water, 100 atoms decay and release their radiation. It's the same in solids too. Perhaps we have some contaminated beef with radioactive cesium in it. If it has 5,000 becquerels per kilogram of radioactive cesium, that means in the 1 kilogram of beef, each second 5,000 cesium atoms radioactively decay and emit their radiation. Now, in the latter half of March, we began hearing about radioactive iodine and radioactive cesium in drinking water. Radioactive iodine and radioactive cesium are produced in large amounts inside of nuclear reactors, and they are turned into gas and vapor very easily. So during an accident, a lot of them tends to be released along with the steam and gas that escapes from a nuclear reactor. We were seeing this on the news, and the Japanese Science Ministry also began keeping track of it on its website, where they kept daily amounts of radioactive cesium and iodine found in the drinking water for each prefecture. Naturally, along with this, we were told what the Japanese government safety limits are, and this was the first time that we had ever heard of these limits because we had never dealt with this situation before. The Japanese government safety limits for radioactive iodine is 300 becquerels per liter, and the Japanese government safety limit for radioactive cesium is 200 becquerels per liter of water. Because children are more sensitive to radiation, there's a separate limit of 100 becquerels for them. So as we watched the news, we saw the numbers rising and rising in the end of March, and people began to get very concerned. In Tokyo at one point, it hit 210 becquerels per liter of radioactive iodine. Now this is below the 300 becquerel limit for adults, but above the limit for children. I think people were on the verge of panic. Stores got emptied of their bottled water, and we all wondered where this was going to go. Fortunately, as the days went on, the numbers started to decrease, and to my knowledge, the numbers never passed the Japanese government safety limits. Now, recently, something a little bit disturbing has come to light. It seems that the Japanese Health, Labor, and Welfare Ministry very quietly changed the Japanese safety limits for these substances in drinking water and other foods on March 17th. To my knowledge, there was no public notice of this. When we heard of the limits for the first time, it was the new limits which had just been changed. Now there's a document on the Japanese Ministry website detailing these new limits. Please have a look. This is the document downloaded from the Japanese Ministry website. You can see it's dated March 17th, and this is the Japanese calendar for 2011. And this text down here basically states, concerning the March 11th, 2011 Tokyo Electric Power Company Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident, the Prime Minister is issuing a declaration of a state of emergency. And it goes on to say that to stop foodborne sanitation dangers and for the purpose of attempting to protect citizens' health based on food hygiene law, some new temporary regulations will go into effect. Now, one very key point that I would like to point out is this sentence right here, which says, Kokumin no kenko no hogo o hakaru koto, which essentially means to aim to protect citizens' health. Now, I encourage you to download this document and do your own translations to verify what I'm saying, as well as check the details yourself. Now, page 2 of this document has the actual technical details. This says Hoshase yoso, which is radioactive iodine, and here we have water, milk, and dairy products, 300 becquerels per kilogram. Now, 1 kilogram of water is equal to 1 liter, so this is 300 becquerels per liter. And then down here, this is for vegetables, 2,000 becquerel limit per kilogram of vegetables. The next section is Hoshase cesium, which is radioactive cesium. Once again, we have water, milk, and dairy products, 200 becquerels. And we have vegetables, meat, eggs, fish, other, 500 becquerels. Okay? So here are the two limits I talked about earlier. 300 becquerels of radioactive iodine and 200 allowed in drinking water. And we can see a lot more is allowed per kilogram of vegetables and other foods. Now, this final section is a little difficult for me to keep my composure when I talk about, because I quite honestly find it pretty unconscionable. This is uran, which is Japanese for uranium. Apparently, according to the Japanese government, there is a safe amount of uranium which is allowed in foods. So this says food products for small children, drinking water, milk, and dairy products, 20 becquerels. And then once again we have vegetables, meat, and other food products, 100 becquerels of uranium. And this final section completely blows my mind. I can't understand why any of this would be acceptable in food. This is plutonium and other alpha emitters. So this is plutonium, americium, and other substances that emit alpha radiation. Once again, we have food products for young children, drinking water, and milk and dairy products, 1 becquerel. And then we have vegetables, meat, eggs, fish, other foods, 10 becquerels. Okay, let's compare these newly enacted safety levels to previous ones. According to simplyinfo.org, before March 17th, the Japanese safety limit for radioactive iodine in drinking water was 10 becquerels per liter. This, as you saw, this new document increases it to 300 becquerels. It's a 30 times increase. As you'll recall on that first introductory page, it says that these regulations were being done to protect people's health. So apparently increasing the amount of exposure a person can have in their drinking water by 30 times to radioactive iodine is protecting people's health. Radioactive cesium also had a limit of 10 becquerels per liter prior to March 17th. It is now increased 20 times to 200 becquerels per liter in order to protect people's health. Let's compare this to some other countries and some other standards. The World Health Organization recommends 1 becquerel per liter of radioactive iodine and cesium. Germany has a limit of 0.5 becquerels per liter, and the United States, my country, has a limit of 0.111 becquerels. So you can see that the Japanese limits are quite honestly astronomically high compared to their previous limits and compared to other nations in the interest of protecting people's health. Now, I would like to fast forward to that last section, the acceptable limits of plutonium. Plutonium is the most toxic substance known to life. It, along with other radioactive elements in its class, such as americium, emit what's called alpha radiation. Alpha radiation isn't so harmful outside of the body because it has difficulty traveling through air, but inside of the body it's extremely devastating. It just takes 1 microgram, 1 particle of plutonium the size of a piece of dust, stuck in your lungs or intestines or anywhere else in your body to become cancer. There's a well-known photograph in a book done a while ago by a researcher who implanted a particle of plutonium into the lung of an ape. 48 hours later, a photograph was taken and the damage was clear. Plutonium is also not naturally occurring. There are barely trace amounts of it left on Earth naturally. Almost all the plutonium on Earth comes from nuclear fission, either nuclear reactors or nuclear weapons. There is clearly no reason that any amount of plutonium should be allowed in our food or water. And if food or water is found to contain plutonium, it should be disposed of and should not be sold or consumed. It's really unconscionable. And I was actually really dismayed when I researched this and found that America also has an acceptable level of plutonium, albeit half of Japan's acceptable level in water. The EPA has a 0.55 becquerel limit. While we're talking about becquerels, there's one other important thing that I'd like to talk about. When the general public hears about radioactive contamination in water, they're hearing about becquerels per liter. There is 1 liter of water in this bottle. I measured it carefully with this measuring cup. When TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, talks about the radioactive wastewater that has leaked under the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant or other radioactive waste that they have, they don't talk about becquerels per liter. They talk about becquerels per cc, becquerels per cubic centimeter. Okay? This is a cubic centimeter of water. This is not a joke. This is 1 cc. I measured it carefully with this eyedropper, which has a 1 milliliter mark on it. 1 milliliter is equal to 1 cc. Now, if you hear 100 becquerels of radioactive iodine per liter of water, you think, that's not so bad, that's still within the Japanese government safety guidelines for drinking. However, there are 1,000 cc's per liter. So if Tokyo Electric Power Company talks about 100 becquerels per cubic centimeter, because there's 1,000 cubic centimeters in a liter, that's the same as saying 100,000 becquerels per liter. It's a way to make the number look smaller. It looks 1,000 times, 3 orders of magnitude smaller. This is a way to downplay the situation. This is almost a form of deception. So when you hear authorities talking about units, be very careful and listen closely to the units. Because in this case, we hear about our drinking water as becquerels per liter, but Tokyo Electric Power Company talks about becquerels per cubic centimeter in order to try and make the situation not look so bad by making the number smaller and playing on assumptions that the general public is going to make when they hear the word becquerel. That's all the time I have for today, but I'd like to leave you with a couple things to think about. The Japanese Science Ministry has no water data available on its website before March 18th. Is there any meaning in that? Do the Japanese safety limits protect the health of the citizens like the Japanese ministry document says? And what does the handling of these limits in this situation say about the policies and priorities of the Japanese government, both locally and abroad? Thank you for watching.